Hi, this is Maggie. In this video we're going to complete our auction software example by implementing the design we've created in Python. Now, a few notes. First, we never designed the complete software system. We barely designed a tiny corner of it. We never saw a complete requirements document or even a vague description of the complete requirements. So this implementation is simply to illustrate how the associations between the objects are implemented and how the use case sequence diagram is implemented. Second, implementation isn't the end of the development process, it's somewhere near the beginning. We would need to thoroughly test each individual class and the system, and then there's the long period of software use and maintenance. So when I say we're going to complete our example, I mean that this will be the last video about this program. Now we have a sequence diagram, which I've cleaned up a little bit, and we had a class diagram. I've made some small changes for consistency and clarity. I've changed the language to always use the word value when referring to the amount of a bid. A value will be a float. A bid is an object of class bid. Now I have a file here, and I'm going to put all of our classes in a single file, again to keep it simple, so we don't have to import a lot of classes. And I'll begin at the top somewhat arbitrarily with the bid class. We'll annotate the fields. We'll call this bid value. A float. Account, a reference to an account object, and listing, a reference to a listing object, the listing that the bid is a bid on. And we have an initializer, in which we will initialize all fields from parameters. And we have the getValue method, from which we will return the value in the field. Now let's implement listing. And we'll annotate name, description, minimum bid value, and current high bid, which is a reference to a bid object. And we'll have an initializer, which will initialize the name, description, and minimum bid value from parameters, but we'll set the current high bid to none. And then there are three accessors: get view, get current high bid, and get minimum starting bid. Call that value. For get view, we'll return a string consisting of the name and the description. And for the other two, we'll return the values stored in the fields. So get current high bid, returns a bid object, and get minimum start value returns a float. And then we have set high bid, which will set the value in the field to the parameter passed, a reference to an object of class bid. Note that we certainly did talk about a duration of a listing and the time started and the difference between an active and an inactive listing. Implementing this would involve a class such as time or datetime so that we could obtain the time from the system clock and do math with time. And I feel that would be distracting, so I haven't talked about active versus inactive listings. Okay, so let's move on to account. Let's just give account a name and an ID and not worry about login information since we're not implementing anything to do with that functionality. And then we'll need a list of bids, a list of listings, and a reference to the auctioneer. Now I've made the decision to implement the bids and listings as lists, but a better organization would probably be to organize them into a dictionary by an ID or timestamp, because that would make retrieval easier. So we'll write the init method, and that will take name, ID, and auctioneer as parameters. And then the only other method we have is add bid. And it takes bid as a parameter. And we'll just append that to our list of bids, which is initialized to the empty list. Now the really interesting class is Auctioneer, because Auctioneer is at the center of our sequence diagram. The sequence diagram is primarily the auctioneer handling a bid message. So let's begin by setting that up. Class auctioneer. And right now we don't have any fields, so we won't annotate or write an initializer. We'll write the bid method, which takes a listing and a bid value as parameters. Now immediately I see that I don't have the account making the bid being passed as a parameter, and that also needs to be a parameter because you can see in the sequence diagram that the auctioneer needs to send a message to the account. It needs to send it the add bid message if the bid is valid. So let's fix that sequence diagram. And the class diagram. And we'll start to write the method. Okay, now we didn't actually finish the sequence diagram. We didn't handle checking that the bid is high enough. I left that as an exercise for you. So let's write first according to the sequence diagram we have. We first send a message to the listing, getting the current high bid. We'll need to store that in a variable, and we'll call that current high bid. And it's of type bid. Now we have our one conditional. If that's none, so if there's no current high bid, then we need to get the minimum starting value. That's of type float. So we'll annotate a variable to store that. Now we're not checking anything, So we'll plow ahead as if our bid value were higher than the current high bid or greater than or equal to the minimum starting bid. We'll go back and fix it after we've finished implementing the sequence diagram as if we have it. So on the sequence diagram, you can see that after the conditional box, we get the value from the current high bid. This should actually be an alternate to the conditional, because we don't do that if the bid was none. There would be nothing to talk to here if it was none. So we need this to be an else block. So let's edit this diagram. We just stretch this box down and put a dashed line separating the two branches. And write else below the dashed line. So the get value message belongs to the else part of this, because we only do that if we have an actual bid object. And if it's none, we don't, of course, we get the minimum bid. So same thing in our code. We write an else. And we'll get the bid value from the bid object if there is a high bid object. Okay, so now we create the bid. So high bid equals bid, and we pass into the constructor the value, the account, and the listing. That's the value that came in as a parameter, the original value from the account, what they want to bid, our new high bid. We'll annotate the bid. And now from the sequence diagram, we send that bid to the listing and to the account. And that's all of the messages in our sequence diagram, showing how a bid message to the auctioneer object is handled. But let's fix it now so we can only bid if the value of the new bid is higher than the old bid or greater than or equal to the minimum bid. So I'll use a flag variable for this. Bid is high bid. And I'll initialize that to false. I'm using a flag because there are two different conditions depending on whether there is or isn't a current high bid. So it seems easier to just use a flag and set it in each of the conditional blocks. So we'll set it to the value of bid value greater than or equal to minimum starting value in the if block, and we'll set it to the value of bid value greater than current bid value in the else block. And we need to check that the bid is the high bid before we legitimize it here by creating a bid object. Now we might actually want to return that flag from the bid method of Auctioneer, and that way the object that sent the message gets back the information of whether the bid was successful or not. So I'll modify that here and in the sequence diagram and the class diagram. Now, because we don't have a full system with an interface here, I'll just write a little main function as a client program to test this system. Let's create an auctioneer. And then an account object and a listing object. We haven't hooked up any sort of way to create listings from accounts, so for the purpose of this demo, the listing is not connected to any account. So I'll pause the video and write something. Okay, Now, in the sequence diagram, the bid message is coming from the account, but again, we haven't hooked up any mechanism for that to happen yet. So I'll directly send the bid message to the auctioneer, but pass in the account and listing that I created and a minimum bid. We'll get back whether the bid was successful or not and report the results. I've set the minimum at 2 cents. So I started with a bid of 1 cent, which should get rejected. Then I tried a bid of 2 cents, which should end up as a bid object and as our current high bid for the listing. Then I try again to do a bid that's too low, 1 cent again, and then a bid that's higher, 4 cents. And I decided to send the get view message to the listing and print out the listing first. So you can see I'm bidding 1 cent, then 2 cents, which should become our high bid, then 1 cent again, and then 4 cents, which should become our high bid, and a message that the bid was a success or a failure based on the result returned from the bid message to the auctioneer. And there's one other thing that we need to change in this program. Any type that hasn't yet been declared that we're using in an annotation, like account and listing here in bid, we'll need to enclose in quotes in the annotation, including in our parameter lists. All annotations. Okay, and reading through this as I was making those changes, there were a few small errors, like having the order of parameters wrong, or not having the correct name of a variable. And so you just need to read through code before you try to run it. And it would have, I would have programmed this better if I had been more careful with my class diagram and put the actual names of the fields and the methods here, and if I had done that with my sequence diagram, if I had gotten the parameter lists the same as the ones in the class diagram. So that consistency is important, because then I could work from either of these as a blueprint and have the accurate names. Here I had sort of 3 different things that I was trying to mix together. Anyway, let's run this program now. It should be consistent now. And the first thing is that get view, which is the name and the description. And then the 1 cent bid was a failure because the minimum bid was 2 cents, but the 2 cent bid was a success. So there's no bid at that point if the system's working right. So it's checking against that minimum bid. And then the bid of 1 cent was a failure. It should be checking against the bid, and the bidding of 4 cents was a success. So we got the results we expected. It would probably be nice to add the minimum bid amount to the view, right? And print the view of the auction between each bid to confirm that the bids are working as we expect. To practice with this, think about how we would do that. Write it up as a sequence diagram and program it. Even if you can do it without the sequence diagram, write the sequence diagram up for practice. Good luck.